I'm delighted to be able to share today with such an illustrious panel. What I'll ask the speakers to do is just take a minute, 2 minutes just to introduce themselves and just to tell us who they are, what they do, and why they're here to talk about the future of Sligo Gaol.
Do you want me to start? Okay, thank you.
My name is Eva Costello and I represent Fáilte Ireland here today. I'm based here in the Sligo office on Temple Street and primarily working on the Wild Atlantic Way, which I hope you've all heard about at this stage. Thank you for the invitation, and I just credit to, I think, the group, Friends of Sligo Gaol. I think they're doing a fantastic job, and I think it's a really excellent project.
How you doing? I'm Ciarán McHugh, and I'm involved in Friends of Sligo Gaol. I'm an operations manager for a telecoms company by day, and do also some landscape photography. So one of my roles in Friends of Sligo Gaol is I have been liaising with looking into producing a feasibility study, looking at the tenders, getting an application leader, which delighted to say went across their desk last week, and we should hear back from that towards the end of October. And the aim will be that will take 4 months to commence, and this actual conversation is recorded and will feed into that feasibility study. So
anything you say can and will.
The feasibility study starts now.
I'm Gillian O'Brien, just been bored by me, but I guess I'm sitting on this panel more because of a report I wrote a couple of months ago called it was a guide to best practice in terms of inception, development and operation of site-specific museums, which came out of a workshop that was held in Cork in March of this year with a group of people who work from sort of the very beginning to the end product of establishing site-specific museums and then running them. And so that report was designed to kind of really assist, I suppose, groups like Sligo Gaol in putting together the process and that. So I guess I'm wearing a slightly different hat for this part of the discussion.
My name is Siobhan. I'm the Heritage Officer with Sligo County Council. I'm representing the Council today and deputising for Chief Executive Ciarán Hayes. My role, I suppose, is generally to develop a county heritage plan, to deliver that with the Heritage Forum across the areas of natural heritage and built heritage archaeology, and also a focus on Sligo Gaol. So we did a conservation plan with the support of the Heritage Council for Sligo Gaol in 2010, which was adopted by the members in December of that year. And we've also been very fortunate to partner and liaise also with the Friends of Sligo Gaol, who really, it's been a game changer when they have become involved in the jail, and we very, very much welcome. The local authority very much welcomes their involvement and engagement, and very much appreciate it.
My name is Carey. I'm here because someone else couldn't make it. Niall Bergen from Kilmainham Gaol, and when I see Brian Crowley in the audience, I'm thinking Brian Crowley should actually be up here. So I managed Kilmainham Gaol for 5 or 6 years. In the past, I managed Kilmainham Gaol, the GA Museum as well. I was a former colleague of Siobhan as a heritage officer. So I kind of come out with different hats, but I might defer to my former colleague Brian on occasions.
I'm Patrick McHugh from Lifford Old Courthouse. Lifford Old Courthouse is where Sligo Gaol is, I think, hoping to be in a few years. Around 20 years ago, the local voluntary body came together to rejuvenate the courthouse, which was lying empty. 20 odd years later, we employ 16 people as a social enterprise, offering a range of facilities, and it really started the same as here, a group of interested parties coming together to try and do something, and hopefully we'll be able to give a bit of advice on how to do that.
Great. Thank you all for that. Can everyone hear me? Do I need a mic? Yeah. Great. So the format is very simple. I've been provided with about 10 or so questions, which are a way of opening up the discussion, really. And so I'm going to go through those, and then we'll open up the floor to questions at the end. The first question is directed, I think, particularly to Tim and Patrick, but it's open to the panel, is talking about what are the attractions, the particular things that you think attract people in to places like Kilmainham, like Lifford. What are the things that sort of bring people through the door?
it's a sort of, Kilmainham is the sort of place, you know, I always thought it would have been interesting to take a picture of people on their way in and then take a picture of them on their way out, to see the change of expression. And I think you touched on it in terms of there's a voyeuristic element to it. I think that for Kilmainham, there's the good and the bad, and we all have that level of humanity in us, that we have the good and the bad, and they kind of come into microcosm in prisons, and it's such an intense experience that I think there's something that deeply resonates with people, in terms of, you know, it could have been me, or would I have done it, or, you know, would I have been a patriot or not. We always think we would have been the patriot, but we might have been the jailer. And there's the voyeuristic, there's that intense experience of dark tourism, of being in, you know, Auschwitz or wherever, and that ultimate control and ultimate just so that putting into that microcosm, that part of humanity, that you don't experience really on a day-to-day basis, but coming to it in a very, hopefully, authentic way, and that's where Kilmainham, I think, really worked in terms of its authenticity. Kilmainham, again, it's one place you can discover or learn about Irish history over a period of 125 years very quickly, and that's can't be underestimated, and the impact of the peace process on its numbers. Like when I left, we were just talking about it, when I left there was 110,000 visitors to Kilmainham. Brian was telling me now it's at 420,000, which is just, I mean, it was busy when I was there, and it just doesn't stop now, and it's a machine. And the peace process was huge in that, and British visitors, and finding out about the history of Ireland and the relationship with Britain has always been a key aspect of that visit. And there's still no better place that you can tell, you know, 130 years of Irish history in one place, and pretty comprehensively in terms of nationalist history. So yeah, I don't know, Brian, if any, I would defer to Brian, because Brian is still working there.
Okay. What's interesting as well is in terms of the rise in visitors, all of that has been tourists, people by tourists. So I think the split between tourists and local visitors has changed somewhat. So our local is around 30% from Ireland now, which is not quite what it was in the past. So what you're getting now you're getting people coming to the jail because it's the normal way to go to what according to TripAdvisor. So you get some people who arrive saying, "I'm here, why am I here?" So you're not always getting that level of maybe engagement with the history that you might have maybe even 10 years ago, I think. And there's like obviously huge interest because of the commemoration in terms of the local audience and maybe the Anglophone audience, but there's also now a huge audience of people who just want to see prison. And we're just working on our visitor survey at the moment. What I was surprised to see was in terms of when we were asking people what do you want to hear more about, it was a lot more about the women and children and the social history, which, and then again, it's only anecdotal, but I felt like 20 years ago, we started there. I felt it was much more, because it was more local audience, much more focused on that history. It's kind of been interesting to see what it is that attracts people. But in terms of what attracts people, it seems positive feedback from other visitors. The other really interesting thing about Kilmainham Gaol is there's never been an advertising campaign saying Kilmainham Gaol. It's never been pushed. There's never been a post campaign or a campaign in the United States or England. So it's kind of really interesting to see how word of mouth is probably the most sustainable way of getting people to visit your site.
Yeah, just on that, Lifford is not in Dublin, so we don't get a lot of passing trade per se. So one of the things that we found is that when visitors come to us, we always kind of ask them where they heard about the place, what brought them here today. An interesting thing I found is the responses they were, it sounds like it's fun, which was always strange when someone said they're visiting a jail sounds fun. The other one was interesting, which I think it's that forbidden thing. Very few people, if you've remained on the right side of the law, have ever been inside a jail or a prison. So the idea of being able to go into one of these buildings is always intriguing to people. But it really surprised me in the few years that I've been working there, the amount of people who have said, just even the idea of going to a prison sounds fun. We do try and keep our tours kind of informative and fun at the same time. It's very interesting that people are drawing to buildings like this, and as Gillian mentioned, there are a huge amount of them. And it's a kind of a natural curiosity of, I probably shouldn't be allowed to go into a prison like this, but we will do anyway. And it's kind of always amazing the range of visitors that you would get. Particularly kids are enthralled by the place. The idea of being able to try out the solitary cells, being able to try buttermilk, which most of them don't enjoy, little things like that draw them into the prison experience. So our tours are slightly different in that we keep group sizes quite small. First thing that all visitors do when they arrive are they are sentenced to a crime. So it's the same crimes and punishments that people would have received. So if you learn nothing else, when you leave the prison on that day, you know that if someone stole sheep in 1841, likelihood is 14 years transportation. So they leave, they remember that, because we kind of involve them in the process the whole way through. So I think it's people are drawn to it, and when you get them in there, they are eager to learn about it. Very few people, because we're off the beaten track a little bit, find us by accident. There's not a great crowd of people looking to visit Donegal County Council offices. So when they come into us, they're there for a reason, so we can keep them entertained and engaged. I'm sure Sligo is very different though. But keep them engaged, keep them entertained. People want to see these sites, people want to visit them. So that's why I think here is great potential, because you have what we sadly demolished in 1908, which is a huge structure that's there to be, I don't want to say exploited, but there to be explored, the potential to be explored. And that's something that I think hopefully will be something that can get going in the future.
Great, thank you. The second question relates to the issue of how you engage communities more broadly, and I suppose particularly the local community. And I think maybe Siobhan, would you like to talk to that, sort of how you engage communities as a heritage officer in these kind of projects?
Yeah, I suppose, just related back to our experience in the jail, and perhaps just to look at it through a local authority lens as well. I suppose that local authorities by default or design, we get heritage assets into our ownership. Some of them we acquire willingly, some of them are legacy issues, and I suppose the jail in Sligo is a legacy building of national importance that was left to the jail with its closure in 1956. I suppose that the role of a local authority is very much around building sustainable communities, trying to support good character in terms of building and design, trying to involve the historic environment, the built environment in terms of placemaking. So our approach in terms of looking at historic assets and looking at community engagement is for those purposes. It's not necessarily from a tourism point of view. It's not necessarily from exploiting the heritage asset per se. And I suppose that we've learned over the last couple of years, particularly when we after doing the conservation plan, and I suppose with the Friends of Sligo Jail, there are so many different communities out there that want to engage with the jail without us even making a call, actually asking for people to get involved. You have the IT, and Tamlin did a very good run through this morning in relation to the type of projects that communities readily want to get involved in. So IT in terms of the architecture department, and also the theatre design department also did a big exhibition there as well. You've got obviously history and heritage groups of a natural grow for the site and the story of it. Local communities, people, the families, and even just over coffee and tea today, how close the connection is. People are talking about their grandparents or my great granduncle who have spent time in the jail, and they have family memorabilia, etc., that they're holding on to. So it's not that long ago, and the connection is still very, very strong. Obviously, local musicians, we've had a lot of videos shot in the jail. We've had art installations, we've artists coming to do collaborative explorations of the jail. Schools obviously want to get in and do school tours or artwork. Theatre, we've worked with the Hawkswell, we've worked with Sligo Youth Theatre in terms of having experiential events within the jail itself. Photography, storytelling, reminiscences, and I suppose there's so many different approaches that could be taken. We're very much on a learning curve. It's very much, kind of a suck it and see situation where we get an approach and we see can we actually facilitate an approach. We'd much prefer to be able to do that much more cohesively and constructively with Sligo and with the various interests. I suppose that in a broad sense, the local authority is very much about breaking down barriers and trying to be as inclusive as possible. And if we can use the heritage asset perhaps in a mixed-use way, not just alone in terms of a tourism lens, but something that the whole community could be involved in, I think it's something that we would very much welcome and would certainly support.
Thank you for that. Brings us on, I suppose, broadening it out is how something like Sligo Gaol can be linked to other aspects of tourism in Sligo, like Bram Stoker, cholera epidemic, kind of broader dark tourism experience, as it were. Maybe Gillian and Eva might speak to that and how you situate the site within a broader tourist network.
Well, yeah, I suppose we've many visitors that come into Ireland, and a lot of research that Fáilte Ireland have done over the years would suggest that we're kind of a niche country. We're expensive overall to travel to. So the people that come here have really selected Ireland. It's not your bucket and spade type of holiday. So we've segmented that market that come into the country from the main key markets, which are the US, GB, France and Germany. And the culturally curious is a big cohort of people that come in. Now that group of people are probably, they want to just get under the skin of a place and get to understand a little bit about an area. And our culture is extremely interesting to that cohort of people. And so the connections of any of those sorts of festivals, and like the Bram Stoker Festival in Dublin, the massive connection to that here in Sligo, and that's kind of becoming a national festival, and that's the type of activity that we fund and would bring people in. And I do think there's a great opportunity for Sligo to get involved in that now at a national festival level. But from a dark tourism point of view, that's growing, and Gillian obviously has lots of knowledge on that as well. It would again be quite niche in terms of number of visitors that come in, but it is of huge interest, and the authenticity of a jail really adds to that.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of Sligo and how you'd link aspects, I mean, there's two, I guess, prongs to that. It's being both same and different. So in terms of the dark tourism offering, there's the opportunity to have the say, this is similar to, if you liked this, you might also like, in that you're taking that sort of approach to it in that sense. And it's been interesting going around how many people I've met who have gone, when I'd say, was in Wicklow Jail, and they've gone, have you been to Cork? There are, that is a thing. Or if you liked this, you'll also like. So that's certainly something which isn't necessarily to do with the local offering, but could be, depending on that. But also there's the opportunity of it being different, which is also, a very positive thing. And interestingly, the Kilkenny family experience I mentioned, I had never heard of it, but was told about it at the Medieval Mile Museum. So it's a very different offering, and at the end of the tour, and this is something that is not done. I've, having been to 40-something sites in the last 6 months, I feel I'm a reasonable authority on this, is how infrequently, when you're at a site, do they ever suggest you go anywhere else. Now I know it's sort of part of what they say they do, but it's happened, I could name a handful. And everywhere I go, I talk to people. I don't normally say what I'm doing. I don't identify myself as being, doing a project. But the Medieval Mile Museum did, it was they who suggested, having been at a medieval thing, if you don't want to do something medieval, how about a different experience in Kilkenny, which would be to do the famine thing, which you don't expect to do in Kilkenny, because there's the castle and the friary and St. Canice's. And so that, Sligo Gaol being different to some of the other offerings is also a very positive thing, that you can say, well, if you've done this, you've been to see the megalithic tombs, you should also go and see Sligo and get a much broader experience of the area, as well as kind of, sort of the urban
part. So I think there are loads of opportunities there.
Great, thank you. I noticed that Ciarán provided me with this list of questions in which his name did not appear as a suggestion. I think we might ask him at this stage to contribute
Sure.
and maybe on that question.
Well, I think it's interesting you're saying, like, you know, you can visit a similar site and you can see you visit the jail and it's different from another history aspect. My interest in the jail is that my wife Siobhan is an archaeologist and I'm into photography, and so I was interested very visually in the building, and it's visually into it. But we're 4 years doing this now, and the visuals are still there and very impressive, but what's become obvious, it's just a stage, it's just a theatre. And a lot of people come to the jail and they realise, oh my God, some of it, you know, half of it get demolished in the 80s, and they go, that's a travesty, and I say, okay, you get over that. You know, if you visit the main, you don't, as I said to you, you don't visit 200 cells. It's really just a stage to actually see, you know, to hear stories. And the stories that we've heard from the jail are already public. Like some of my colleagues today have it, some of the ones even at the conference have even slipped the paper of a little nugget relating to the jail. And it's the social history has become more attractive to me than the actual building itself. So you can visit Sligo Jail, so yes, you can see that it's a prison and you can learn about incarceration of it. But you can also learn about everything from, you know, it starts in the 1830s, and you learn everything about how cholera didn't impact the jail. Why didn't cholera impact the jail? Because it had fresh running water pumped in from the river above where the sanitation was. How did you get there? Treadmill. Why was the treadmill there? It all interlinks, but you're also getting to say, well, you know, you look through the records, see why was there so many frequent visits during the famine, and you're learning all about the famine and the quality of food that was in the prison. You then go on and you start, you skip a few decades and you're up to all the bicentenary stuff that we're going through now, and you're reading all these different, you know, the Michael Collins commemoration there tomorrow. People are learning more about Michael Collins than this day in jail. So while the jail itself is a stage, and you hear stories about it, the stories that you learn don't necessarily need to relate to the topic. So I think you could literally, this is nowhere like the main museum, you learn 130 years of Irish history. I think you can learn a huge amount of both Irish history and, okay, it's great here in Michael Collins, but it's also great here in the small little stories. Like I said, I think that's when we found the research in our book, that we started, okay, let's not go and do a book on Michael Collins' time in jail. Let's go and research an ordinary person and find out what type of things were they sentenced for, and it just makes it, often people are more attracted to just the random person, because I think when you guys talk about identifying with somebody, you know, okay, we all like Michael Collins, or not like Michael Collins, but you can see this girl Bridget, and you know, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and you know, she gets herself into mischief, so I can see her getting cheated in Australia about 3 years ago. So it's that, you know, I think you can look at something like that that you can, it can be viewed as historic in a prison sense, but also in all of the aspects.
Okay.
Sorry, yes.
No, that's great. I mean, I think that sets the scene very well. To begin a discussion, perhaps, of how to focus in on the jail itself and how the jail might develop. And this is a kind of open question to the group: is how you can see Sligo Jail developing in the next decade, for instance, and how it's going to be a part of the community in Sligo.
Well, I suppose from a tourist point of view, maybe looking at it that way, I would think that it could become a really good visitor attraction in terms of what the facilities are there, that the authentic story is there, and you know, hearing some of what you just said. When visitors come to a place, they want to really feel part of it, but reading things on panels, as you say, is in the most interesting way. You also want to go through touch and smell and sound, and you know, all the other senses would need to be involved, I think, in excellent customer or visitor attractions. I think also you've got the added advantage that you've got plenty of parking in that area, you know, and there's lots of opportunities, I think, in terms to make it into a good visitor attraction. Now, all that obviously takes money. It means a lot of investment, but I think if that investment can be shown through your feasibility study, that there's an knock-on economic benefit to the community and to the area, to Sligo and the northwest, that you know, that return on investment can maybe come back, that it might become a compelling part of your feasibility study. But there's also other opportunities like conference venues. There's no conference really, I mean, no disrespect to the lovely facilities in the hotel here, but unique conference facilities are very, bring business tourism is massive. We bring in a lot of business tourism into Ireland, and you can see with the convention centre in Dublin and so on. But Get West, we just don't have anything like that. So there's another thought. Or gala dinner venues. People want to go to really unique places to have dinner. There's a shortage of those. So that kind of thing, jails and in other parts of the country that Gillian's spoken about, have unique other ways of having income streams. So I think there's lots of opportunities, and I'm looking forward to helping work on that.
One of the areas we had spoke about is as you see in the Judge Mar, there is an absence of, when you see Kilmainham, you've got that big central chamber, Cork City has it as well, and you go, oh, well, you're talking about venues, it's restricted. But the flip side of that is, ultimately, if you are to down the line to convert it into a premier tourist attraction for the Northwest region, you're going to have to build a structure to encompass whatever that experience is. And if, as part of that revenue stream, you would want to see, well, if we could go and generate X amount of revenue if we had a venue that could hold this link to the prison. So it doesn't necessarily mean to be the prison, but it can be attached to it. So you can build a purpose-built facility that could encompass just as one aspect, and then you're also linked to the prison. So they're separate but similar.
How do you sort of see yourself reconciling that with the community involvement or the broader contribution?
Well, friends of Sligo Gaol, I'm just afraid that somebody just do something. It's at the minute we just came along and saw the decline and what was there needs to be stopped and reversed. I suppose we'd like to see the building life put back into it, the conservation plan implemented, and I suppose from talking to businesses and everywhere else, tourism seems to be the number one. Like, you shouldn't try and reinvent the wheel when you're doing something. So tourism will have to be, would imagine would have to be a plank on it. But equally, I totally get what Siobhan talks about, both community participation, and there's something I think it's kind of a soapbox that a lot of you have heard before. But we ran a competition to raise revenue. We started to raise money. So the community did very little of it. We came up with this jail and bail idea where somebody had been nominated to spend time locked up in a mock cell, and they had to raise funds to get released from it. And it was one of the meetings. It was a little complex, the formula on it. So I set up the website and get nominated online. And the first one came through. I said, I wonder how that works. So it was a user experience. So I ring this guy. He lived out in Cluny or Killarney actually. And I rang a lady, and she said, yeah, it worked fine. Really looking forward to it. She said, I'm nominating my husband. That's great. Fantastic. Do you intend bailing him? Not sure. And she said, actually, we're doing it because we texted me, children can't participate. I said, well, it's actually for my son. I don't know, was he 13 or 14? But he's 13 or 14, and he was mad at the history, and he really wanted to see the jail. And because for health and safety reasons and for another reason, he couldn't see the jail, except, we run tours of Heritage Weeks. But generally, as far as the general public is concerned, the jail is closed for tours. And we had offered the first prize of whoever raised the most money for doing the tour was they could bring 10 people around the jail. I thought, okay, so I kind of helped the problem, but that's great, he's into it, and the process works, so we came on. And then you start getting really annoyed, and start thinking, like, I have young kids, and we're trying to keep screens away from them as hard as it's so difficult to keep them screens, keep them outside. And you manage to get a young teenager, and he's interested in his history, his social history, and he wants to engage with his history. So, as we have conversations with the council that usually you're accidental owners of the building, and that's true. But that's what's the cliche. We're all just custodians of these things. But it's very much the case with these buildings, particularly when not a lot's happening with it. So the building belongs to the people of the Northwest, really, the people of Sligo, and all the history that you hear from people that are coming back. It's there, and I just got so annoyed that this guy had to go and enter a gimmicky competition, raise probably £1,000 to try and get in and see his history and appreciate his history and historian. So on one hand, yes, you're talking the revenue streams that come to the States, and this is 100,000, 400,000, and we do get phone calls from businesses all around Sligo who are going, yes, we support you with this stuff, but how soon can I start selling hotel rooms? How soon can I start bringing hens and stags through it? And Sligo does need, I think it's fairly well recognised that tourism is going to go into the growth. Things are still tight in Sligo, and that's one of the things that's going to help us get out of it. And you only have a limited stock of heritage buildings that we can work with. So yes, I think without preempting any study, it would seem logical that it would follow the route of other places. But on the other hand, it has to be for the 11 or 12-year-old guy that wants to learn about his own history and interact with it, and the people that own the building can't tell them that he can't see that without offering some kind of solution that we'll work towards. So
How does Lifford sort of have that balance between tourism and community use? How does that work in Lifford?
For us at the moment, the main thing, we're technically a not-for-profit, so any profit that gets made gets reinvested back into the business to create more employment opportunities. The big thing for us, and kind of relates back to the original question, was a case of using every single square inch of the building to its full potential. A few years ago, we started an escape room. So we realised that we have these jail cells. Escape rooms, if anyone doesn't know, it's probably, I think, go on TripAdvisor for any major city, the main attraction that comes up in most of them are escape rooms. You get put in a room, the door gets closed, and you have usually around 60 minutes to escape. So we realised there were a lot of these rooms starting up that were above shops and above bookies that were done up as jail cells. You came into a set and you essentially solved the clues to escape, a bit like the Crystal Maze or something like that. We realised that we actually have some genuine 18th century jail cells that we can lock people up in and charge them €12 a go to try and escape. And in fact, it's our biggest grossing offering by a considerable margin. Way outstrips the tours in terms of income. It's a lot easier for me because I just stand outside a room. But it's little things like that. We just realised that we have this unique space. We're not using it to its full advantage. Recently, we got a relatively substantial bit of funding from the Department of Arts and 20 other things to develop the building as a cultural hub, in a sense. So we're currently installing a lift, which is, again, something that I'll come back to later. When you're doing it the first time, put in all the lifts and stuff that you need at the start. It saves you $500,000 10, 20 years later when you're doing it. But it's developing it into a cultural hub. So from 2019 onwards, we're going to develop an arts and culture program. We just did a fund it a few months ago. We raised $4,000 from voluntary contributions of people who, usually a lot of them are from the community itself, who want to see concerts, not Johnny Cash tribute acts, but things along that. Local artists who are looking for spaces to display their work. They have to thank a lot of Sligo people actually for coming up to us to help us kind of develop these spaces. Now Henry from the Blue Raincoat was actually up. I was amazed at the layout of the building, how much potential there is in old buildings like that you can't get from an auditorium with chairs facing a stage. So we're very conscious about trying to stay open. It's a constant struggle. No one's getting rich off this, unfortunately. But everything is kind of for the greater good of keeping 16 people employed. 8 or 9 of those are full-time, and then some are with seasonal workers as well. So it's kind of finding that balance, but also using the building to its full potential, because you have a great, great building. Should be used, should be there to be used. There are more ways than just the guided tour side of it as well to bring people in. So we realised that bringing those people in, 16, 17-year-olds may not have been interested in the guided tour at the start. Once they're in the cell for an hour and you start speaking to them, usually a couple of weeks later, if they're local, they're back in with some friends to do the tour. So it all kind of connects in one way, kind of circle thing, where people come in for one thing, come back and do the same thing, do something different the next time. And if we change the escape room, we come back a few months later and do it again.
Do most people stay?
Unfortunately not. It's probably around 40% to 60%.
Still up there?
Still a few groups from the summer, yeah. Be there until next year.
Who do we think needs to be brought on board for a project like this to be successful? I mean, who are the sort of main players you see as contributing to the success, the future success of the jail, in terms of stakeholders, players, who are working?
I suppose the council has, as the owner of the building, has a job to do in terms of leading out on that. I suppose just to step back just for a second to your previous question, I suppose, you know, where does the council see the jail in 10 years' time? Or what vision or what role can the council play? So the council is very much committed, you know, to having the building open for public access. Is very committed in terms of having it as a visitor attraction in whatever mix that is. We don't fully have clarity around what that will be, and the council very much recognise that it has a role, you know, to lead out on this process with its partners, the Sligo Tourism Limited, Friends of Sligo Gaol, Fáilte Ireland, etc. And the feasibility study that we're embarking on, you know, in partnership with Friends of Sligo Gaol this year, that they're leading out on because they have the capacity to do that piece of work, is something that will inform hugely, you know, how the shape of that and the nuts and bolts in terms of what techniques, etc., can happen on the site and what the potential is. So the council is very much aware of its responsibilities in terms of that building, ensuring that it doesn't dilapidate further. In the meantime, that we ensure that it's conserved and it's made as open to the public as we can within that interim period, but also that we coalesce around a vision about having the building open for public access. And
I think the conversation, everything that is up in the air, I think both sides, both Friends of Sligo Gaol and the council probably agree that neither of us are interested in directly running a tourist attraction per se, as in, well, the council doesn't run any other. Do councils run other tourist attractions nationally?
you were going to do it.
Yeah. Well, we just don't give up life. But I think we're looking at saying, well, you know, there probably is another model out there that would involve, obviously, the council-owned building. We always want to have an association who want to go through it, but we're not looking to take the lease on for 50 cents and just do this for the rest of our days, or we'll just be quite numbered. And I don't think county councils are best placed to run tourist attractions, because otherwise we wouldn't have the likes of Fáilte and our private firms. So I think we're both coming at it from a reasonably broad approach to see what comes out in the study. But it's interesting if groupings like this, you know, what other models are out there and what.
Well, one that I'm involved in is the Dublin City Culture Connects company, which has been set up by Dublin City Council to manage and run arts, cultural and heritage entities, and one of those is Henrietta Street. So, and that's, as I say, it's just being launched next week. And they're doing that because Dublin City Council aren't in the business of employing guides. There's a whole raft of stuff that complicates that for them if they were direct employees of the council. The company is much more flexible, it can do things that the local authority can't. So that's...
Who's on the board of that company? How is the board comprised?
I'm on the board. There's 2 councillors. There's a deputy city manager, and then there's a solicitor and 2 other people from the kind of cultural world. So that board was established in the last year to run these, and I think Dublin City Council will be putting more entities through that board. So the board then employ the staff as opposed to the local authority. But the board is obviously, the company is obviously subvented to a large degree by the local authority, but it does have a remit to generate income as well.
Something similar is the case with Spike Island, in that it was developed by County Council and is now run by a sort of separate board which came kind of out of the council in a similar way, though I don't think it has the same, so it has some broad agreement that the Dublin one will have. The other thing just on development is, while neither of you want to run it, and you know, clearly this weekend has shown an enormous amount of goodwill and local interest in developing this as a heritage offering, is that to you know, and you'll all be familiar with these things, is that, you know, at some point there's going to be the inevitable row, which will come at a certain point, but to be also very clear about what that vision is, because away down the road, and I know this having come on, sometimes I come on late into projects, and you don't know the background, and you don't know the personalities, and in a way that's very good, because you don't know who you're not supposed to offend, and you don't know who's the really annoying one, because you don't have that local knowledge, and it's often the best thing is that you don't know, what those local politics are. But there's sometimes a danger when you get, not where you are now, but slightly further along, when you do lose control a bit, that stakeholders aren't left behind. And the stakeholders like Friends of Sligo Gaol won't be left behind, but there will be other groups who will feel they've had an interest and suddenly they're no longer invited to meetings. And I had that experience in Spike Island where when I came in on that project and I said I'd like to have a meeting in the council offices of everybody, open it to everybody, I don't care who comes and what they have to say to me. I'd like everybody there, and they went, oh no, God no, because you'll get all those cranks and this. And I said, I don't care, because they're entitled to a voice, because for 20 years they've been banging a drum saying this should be developed, and now just because they're annoying you, that doesn't mean, and they will have something valuable to say, and they'll have spent all of that time. And they were very strongly kind of not wanting to have that meeting. And we had that meeting, and yet there was a load of shouting and roaring. And I eventually said, I'm going to offend every one of you, because I'm not going to do any of the stuff, but I'm going to do all of your stuff a bit. Because all of your stories need to be told. But none of you will get everything that you thought you wanted. And after that, we had generally speaking, a very healthy, and a dialogue that continued through email and meetings and stuff. But there is that danger, and it's happened on some other sites I've worked on, where it's like, oh right, now in comes the commercial interpretive designer who has their own idea, and off they swan, and everyone is left. And that means openings without the local community goodwill, and nothing will survive. Don't care how much money you put in, nothing will survive unless the local community remains engaged and it remains their site, even if they're not the only people. And obviously they're not the only people who are going to come, but it has to be. It has to keep that sort of momentum and that ownership.
How do you do that, do you think? I mean, is it meetings, is it representation on the board,
It's not being cliquey is one great thing of not having a closed door. I mean, and it's clear, like today, that's not the case here, but you don't know 2 years down the road when something else changes, is that it isn't a clique, and if someone says, I have an idea, or could I suggest this, and you might want to dismiss it, and it might not ever happen, but it can't be that a dialogue is not open, your email box doesn't, you don't respond, and if someone says, I've had this idea, or this person might be interested in funding, even if you know there's not a hope, and sometimes they come off.
Yeah.
It's to keep lines of communication open and make sure that it remains it is Sligo Gaol, and it remains Sligo Gaol, and that the community of sort of the northwest, it remains their thing to a large extent.
I just wanted to come in on that as well a little bit, because I suppose from Fáilte Ireland we have large capital grant schemes that we run, and small grant schemes as well. And the amount of different models there are out there of how to run a visitor attraction, no two are the same, and all of them have their pluses and minuses. But I'd recommend, I think now at this stage, for you to do a couple of things. One is to go and see other visitor attractions of what you think you're looking for. Go on those fan visits, and I know we at Fáilte Ireland we're funding Kilmainham, and the nuns, they have a trust there, and they were very much part of. So we brought them up to Glasnevin Cemetery, and the way that's been interpreted was very interesting, because what they did was they decided to take all the grave diggers out and record what their stories they were telling. And what happened was they all went into the bar, I believe, that's quite nearby.
The grave diggers.
The grave diggers bar, right, yeah. And
dark tour.
So what they did was, the idea was they were going to interview each one of them individually. But what happened was that they started to chat to each other. So they put the microphone in the middle of the table. Now, when you go into Glasnevin and you sit on a bench that's just a little bit past where you come in, you can hear behind you, you can hear the chat. And that was something they recorded. And I think there's an opportunity now for you to record some of those stories from people that might know about the jail. Don't wait until you've got funding down the road, because that, you know how long that might take. But if you can record those authentic people that might have worked here or brought their family up somehow by the economy of the jail being in town, record those now, and you'll have them for whenever it comes to a visitor attraction in years to come, you know?
Yeah, we have actually had a recent event where we have shared people share their stories last year.
Yeah.
We did some, we continuously get people, like I think that last night or this morning, having a sort of map which was done by a prisoner. We get this stuff continuously. It's just once you have a website and email and you're out there, you hold these events, so you see things occur every week, it's the same as last year. No two sets of words are the same. it's I'm not the microphone, I should be passing around.
Under your chair.
Can you go still?
No, I didn't know. We have actually, when we started doing this in our very first year, actually, we went down to Cork. There's a certain bias towards Cork in our group. But we went down to Cork City Jail, where actually I went to town and worked for 6 months, 20 odd years ago, and probably where a lot of this interest came from. And there on one hand you see this amazing building, and it's really just the amount of visitors going through it is huge, and the cash that comes through it. And you think, well, that's the model for us, but it's privately owned, so they just do whatever they want. They have private funding with bank it. And then went down to Camden Fort Manger. Now I think that's changed a couple of times since our visit structure, but they started out as a community group. I think still a community group looking for a lease through the council, and I think they had a lot of advice to us, so to be very careful how you do this, and they had a lot of changes on it. So we have looked at some models and kind of seen, okay, was it like, while the community group versus with working with the council is similar to what we're doing, the product is quite different in one way, I think, big board. And then the most applicable product, for want of a better word, was privately owned. But yeah, there are lots in the people see. Now that we have conferences and feasibility studies behind this, because they were looking at, we're talking the graffiti project here around, thinking, yes, that's something we might actually get back to now. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
I'll get a tour bus for you. Follow my trip.
Dude, it's something a lot of fun. Your work's something a lot better than my work.
I am keen that we leave time to let people speak on the floor, but I think there's two sort of practical questions left, which I'll ask people, Tim and Siobhan, to address very quickly, and then we'll open up the floor, because I think even prisoners need to be released, and conference attendees need to be released too. So one of the questions that struck us on the tour yesterday was the other things that are on the site, Siobhan. I think it's the fire station, and there's a couple of other things. Is there any sense the council is thinking on how it might be reconciled with the jail and these sites?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, so we don't have clarity around how they will be dealt with. I preface all my remarks by saying that the council has no money at all. So anything that we wish to do, we have to apply for grant aid for it, whether it's under the urban regeneration and development fund that's just been recently announced, whether it's Fáilte money or wherever, leader funding. That all has to be brought in and applied for. So it's not that we have cash in our pockets to do this project today or tomorrow. And I suppose that the site is very complex. There's one building which is currently water service administration, is council offices. We've got a suite of sheds at the side which are occupied by Sligo Mountaineering Club. We have civil defence, and we have Sligo Sabacqua. We have the two-storey element of the jail, which is the derelict part, where most of the tours are done, and where a lot of the conservation work has been done over the years. We then have about say that's 55% of the jail, which is the stuff, say half of it on the left hand side, plus a bit which is still intact. And then there's a good whack of it demolished in the 80s to build the fire station. So the physicality of what Ciarán was saying there, the whole site isn't there, but there's enough there to tell the story. So in terms of dealing with those mixed uses, if we come forward with the vision that the whole site needs to be turned into a tourist facility or community access engagement, etc., all compatible uses like that, those other uses have to move somewhere else, or they have to be accommodated somewhere else. And I think that on the strength of, and it's something that's in the conservation plan and was identified, in the conservation plan in 2010, is that we need to resist low-grade use of the jail complex as much as possible for as long as possible. And with that, we need to do a master plan for the whole of the council lands, the 6.5 acres, not just the jail complex that people will be visiting tomorrow, but our modern offices, fire station, that whole block. And I think the feasibility study will very much assist us in shaping, the community's vision that will feed into that overall master plan for the site. I think that's the direction that we need to go.
Very good. I mean, in a way, the knocking down the jail is part of its history. It tells us something about 1980s Ireland as well, perhaps. There's one last question which is directed towards Tim, but I think other people could come in a little bit on if they want. Is what's needed in a sense? God, that's relatively likely, I think. But what key elements are needed to progress the project from here, do you think, after this feasibility stage? Again, this is directed towards Tim, but I think other people can pitch in if they're right.
Yeah, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think the stories need to be, it's going to hinge on the stories, and that has to keep going. And I think it's still, for me, this, and when you look at, say, your initial thing, it needs to make sense to the people of the area. And if it doesn't make sense to them, it's not going to happen, I don't think, in the long term. And whatever, always kind of keep that, well, the tourism element is there in the first whatever years of whatever happens. It's going to be locals who are coming and spending their money, and school kids who are going to give their €4 or whatever for the tour, and that's all very valuable sources of income. So I wouldn't try and go on with, that it's the golden egg of tourism, and tourism will come if it's good. Tourism will come, and in the numbers, but it's got to make sense in terms of local. And I think the relationship with Siobhan is obviously, and the local authority is critical to this. And it is unfortunate that Sligo is a county that doesn't have a lot of money, and that's it. So our main player is kind of off the stage in a way, in terms of money. In terms of all the other supports, they seem to be there for sure. But it is unfortunate in terms of that. But I don't know if anyone else wants to kind of jump in there.
Well, just one thing which comes back actually to the point that you made about there are a number of sites, I think, that familiarisation of other sites, which not necessarily, so one, I think Henrietta Street they should probably go and see, because it's a remarkable development. I've seen it a number of times before. We're in progress and saw it again a couple of weeks ago, and they've done a remarkable thing with that and that with huge support from like DCC and John Stubben and people, and it's remarkable. And the other place, which is a very different offering, is your Cupcake Tower, where they've done the entirety of the interior was destroyed. So actually, the exterior is still authentic. It's the opposite sort of of what, but they managed to tell 4 very different stories on 4 different floors. And just the way in which they've actually thought about how to tell those stories, because I think you're right, this is stories, and I think you're also right in the different stories that you get to tell. It's not, I'm not remotely suggesting you replicate it, but I think they've done something very clever with a very small site, and that it's worth seeing. I was surprised. It is Cork, and I'm not biased towards Cork, but Henrietta Street's not Cork. I can send you all around the country if you want, and Kilkenny for the other one. But I think that thing of going, don't leave it too late to go and see places, and a little investment in actually going with groups, and preferably with a series of questions you want addressed, so that you come out of that. I mean, I think that's a very small investment of money to get a huge range of experience. And you need to have it.
Just to follow on Siobhan's point, I think the master plans, I think you do need to have that as the town or the county, to know what to do with that site. But I think the balance between what is local and what would be compelling enough to bring overseas visitors in has to be balanced as well. If you can actually do a vision that's a big vision, you can maybe break it down into phases, but if your big vision is for something that will be very compelling to bring in overseas visitors, that will bring into the economy, build the economy, create jobs, that becomes something that the government listen to and say, well, that's something we will fund. If it's very local and it just stays very local, it doesn't get the same impact. So I would suggest paint that bigger picture and then phase it.
I think that's something that the word phasing key to the Cabinet reference for our feasibility study was that we're very keen not to get a hugely expensive report for a hugely expensive project that won't happen in our lifetimes. Whereas I'd like to see saying we want to have the premier product at the end of it, but we also want to know what bite can we take off by 2020 and 22 and 24.
Very sustainable.
Yes.
So can I open it up to questions from the floor now? I know we've had a long and very fruitful day, but if anyone has any questions they'd like to address to the such expertise that you're available to you. Yeah.
Can I make a suggestion rather than ask a question? Just to follow up on Eva's point about going to visit places. There are two places that strike me as directly relevant for Sligo Jail, and they're not in Cork. I think you'll have volunteers to go there because they're both in Hobart in Tasmania.
I go as well.
And connected, connected directly. First is Hobart Old Jail, which was the biggest jail in the planet, I'd say. It was huge, all demolished except for the chapel, which then became a courthouse. And just as, how do you tell the story of this jail that took up 4 city blocks in one building, and they manage it? Now there's a little bit of reconstruction, but there's enough of the original building there, and then the story is told very effectively. And then the most poignant place in Hobart, I think, is an old prison called Cascades, which was for women and children. Cascades Female Factory, it was called. Have you been? Where all the interior is demolished. There's nothing there. So you walk in and there's an empty yard. But it's just the way the museum designers have told that story. So for example, as you walk in, written in metal on each side, on one side are the words written by the authorities about the women, so they're all negative, that they're sullen and difficult. And then on the other side, you have the women's words describing their own fate, lonely, sad, desperate. And it's just incredibly poignant. There are a couple of, what would you call them, installations in this empty yard. So, these things, you can deal with demolitions and absences very effectively.
Under your chair.
So you just remind me, I've been to Dachau, and most of that is you see the footprints of the sheds that are there. And it's way more poignant than if they're there at all. The upper most and it's the same thing. So you grant applications to Hobart as well.
Well, they're very good at sharing all of that stuff, so you don't need to go there.
If you take, for example, the Wild Atlantic Way, we looked at the Great Ocean Road, we looked at lots of other samples, and we now have the world's longest defined coastal touring route, and I think it beats them, any of those other ones, hands down. So, that was definitely worth a couple of fam trips to see some of those. But I know I was sent on a fam trip to the UK to look at museums over there, and I was sent to the Armoury Museum in Leeds. And I thought I was going to, I said, seriously, what are they trying to do to me? I absolutely was blown away. It was amazing. They tell the story. The first thing you do is you walk in the door, you pick up a gun, and you kind of hold this big rifle, and they tell the stories of all the wars the British were in different places. But it's the way they tell it. It's the use of animation. It's the use of actors that come out on stages. They had, so the graphics, the videos, the virtual reality. It was absolutely amazing. And for me, I thought I was going to be totally underwhelmed going to an armoury museum. It was. I don't know if any of you have been to it. I definitely recommend it for Leeds. But those fam trips really are so important. So I'd say, get your thinking caps on what you really want to look at, and it's worth an overnight trip, and that's not that expensive.
I'm from Leeds. Did you go at the jousting? The jousting
was there as well.
Yeah.
Oh, it was just it was all different years and eras of wars, and gosh, you've been in a lot of wars.
Any more questions from the floor? Yeah.
Have you been down to Foynes? Museum.
The Foynes Museum. Yes.
It's good.
I know it's different from Sligo Sligo Jail, but it's the stories. I think that's what I was about. I mean, we as a family have been to Kilmainham a number of times to see it. Again, I suppose at the end of the day, it's just it's a number of wars, but what brings you back to the stories and having different stories as well, on a rolling basis, which is good, and you never lose the coming on every time.
I wouldn't necessarily go to all jails either. I would go to other places, if it's like Cadbury's World and or something, just to see how animation and how the stories are told, because that's very engaging, particularly for children, or you know, all of that. It's how the story is told, and it's using all the senses and technology and virtual reality. And the Viking Triangle, has anybody been down to see that experience? I mean, that's really amazing, and that was a small grant scheme that came from Fáilte, Ireland. I think it's 8 people sit in what would have been a thatched hut on rugs. You put on the virtual reality headphones and glasses, and I didn't know much about Vikings in Ireland, but I was really wowed by the story there. It's amazing. You know, you look around you and, you know, there's rats around your feet and there's Vikings coming towards you. It was really, really well done. So something like that, very simply, can be done.
I think we'll take 2 more questions, one from this side of the room and one from that side. We'll have to finish the
I'm just wondering, is there any facility where Fáilte Ireland, for instance, or any other body would fund the people who have been doing the, you know, the Friends of Sligo Gaol, the people who have done all the groundwork? It would seem to me they're the perfect people to send on these trips, and they're doing all this work in their own time. I'm just wondering, is there any scheme or any organisation that funds people to do that kind of research?
I know the way it works with us at the moment is that if you've been given funding and you've got your letter of offer, then we recommend that we take the applicant on a couple of site visits, but you would have had to have your letter of offer. We don't do it in advance of that, but maybe Leader or some other one might do that.
Question over here, yeah.
There were 2 things. One thing is related to what Tim was advising you in terms of taking that time and to keep it usually in the local community. Just to say, if you're looking at something like Manger, which is now hugely popular, that began as a voluntary body of people, and I think its continued success owes a lot to the fact that it retains the sense of authenticity to Irish people, because those culturally curious people that we seem to be wanting to attract, you know, I think they can sniff out when things have become, as Laura said, Disney wisdom, and they sniff it out very quickly, I think. And because it's a word that seems to come up in so many people's thoughts today, I was just wondering what your thoughts were about maintaining authenticity, and what is the key thing that you need to do in terms of maintaining.
I actually think a good tour guide can make a huge difference to your experience. I think that's somebody that's really, and Friends of Sligo Gaol, I mean, those, you know, your group, I think, could be the tour guides that tell that story, keep that authenticity going and alive, you know, because, as you say, that's why people travel to Ireland, is because it's the friendliness of the people, it's our scenery, but it's also the fact that we're real, you know, and it's a safe country to travel to. So I think we have to, you know, continue building on that success, and you know, not, as you say, not let anything become too commercialised either, you know.
On making it authentic, I think one of the pluses we do have in Sligo is if you had a jail with no walls and you wanted to try and create the interior of jails and cells to make it look authentic, we have the 110% end product. It looks like people just went out, you know, got a fire drill in the 1950s and never came back. So from that perspective, as I said, we have, I think, years into it, we can walk around with things like the signs, and we have a lot of stuff in place that because there's been no access to the building that other sites mightn't have.
Okay. I think, unfortunately, time is slightly against us, so I think I'll just remains for me to thank the panel. It's a wonderful project, sort of self-evidently proved today, I think, and I wish everyone best of luck as involved in it.
Equally, I'd like to thank you all for coming and attending the panel this evening, kicking off our feasibility study.